So when I first started into oil painting, I devoured everything I found on the internet of how and why and what products I need, and I found really quickly it can be overwhelming. 20 different artists have 20 different points of view on what it is you should be using. So I wanted to make a little video with you today just to share the things that I have discovered about what I've read and what I've tried and what I've learned that really work for me. The basic products that I find I can't live without, and offer possible solutions for what you might want to get if you're making decisions to start into oil painting.
All right, so let's just talk a little bit about surfaces. So with oil paint, you can paint on heavyweight paper, you can paint on linen, you can paint on canvas, wood, all of those are absolutely fine to paint on. But when I made the transition from acrylic to oils, I was painting on cradle boards. And what I found was, because oil paint dries on a molecular level, it's slower drying. It can take anywhere from 2 to 3 months to dry enough to touch. However, it can take a year or more to cure. Doesn't mean it's going to smush, it's just not cured. So knowing that you're giving your canvas 2 or 3 months to dry, depending on where you live, canvas makes a better option because canvas can dry from the underside as well as the overside because it's framed out like that. Wood is a little bit more dense, so I did make the switch officially to canvases as opposed to board. But it doesn't really matter, it's all personal preference. And the ones you see here are primed with red acrylic. That's how I like to start all of my paintings, with a red acrylic base. But you can start with any color or just simply use white gesso as the background. And there is a video for you to watch if you want to find out more of the reason why I use acrylic, red acrylic on my backgrounds to pump up the heat and the intensity in my work. All right, so brushes are kind of like an intimate experience. It's the only thing connecting you, the artist, to the canvas with the paint. So I've tried several brushes, and the ones I kept coming back to time and time again are these ivory brushes from Rosemary and Company. Now this is a small mom and pop company out of England. They're all handmade brushes, and they're super reasonably priced. They can be anywhere from like $3 up to $20 depending on how big or how small they are. The ones you see here are around $6, $7, and they're absolutely my favorite. And it's the ivory brush, and you'll see most of them are like a filbert or like a square or even a square with a rounded edge, and I absolutely love them. All right, so paint. Paint is a totally important part of this as well. I'm not going to lie, I have several brands of paint in my stash. I've tried a lot of them, but the ones that I keep coming back to are this Van Gogh brand. Now here's a really cool part of it. They're really affordable as compared to other top-notch artist grade paints. These are not really student grade and they're not really artist grade. They're somewhere in the middle. Rich in pigment without the price. So without a doubt, starting, I would say that Van Gogh is a terrific brand to start with. If you start with a brand that's too student grade, then it might not have the rich quality pigment to it. All right, so this is the palette I work off of. It's a glass palette, just a piece of glass. And I use it because, number one, I was using palette paper and I was finding I wasn't getting the mixing as easily as I did on the glass. And then also, this is totally easy to clean. You wouldn't know it from this picture, but once I'm done using it, I can scrape off the paint, I can clean it off again, and it fits perfectly in the easel that I use that I'll show later in this video. So accompanying my palette, I said I scrape the paint off. This is just a cheapy utility scraper. I just scrape any of the paint off that I'm done using. If I want to make more room anything like that, whether it's dry or wet paint, I can easily scrape it back on this palette and it's easy cleanup. So what you see here is Gamsol. Now this is a big container. You do not need this much, but it's just cheaper and more affordable for me to buy it in bulk. And this is what you use to clean your brush in between colors or just getting some of the paint off when you're working. And that little bucket in front of it with the little grid on the bottom, can you look into that? That's what I keep it in. So I keep it in there, I take my brush, I scrub it across the bottom of that little grate, and all of the paint pigment settles to the bottom and it just becomes clean again. It's totally reusable. This is not something you throw away when you're done using. It cleans itself. The sediment will fall to the bottom and you just have clean Gamsol again. Now many artists will use this to thin their paint. I prefer to use an oil medium, but certainly this is something you could use to thin your paint. So when I first started out, I was taught to use walnut oil. I really love adding that extra little bit of oil to my paint. It helps make the paint a little creamier, a little juicier, thins it out a little bit. And that's the first one I learned on. Now this doesn't increase the drying time at all to your paint, so you just need to know that going in, but it does increase the smoothness and the creaminess of it. But recently I have discovered this alkyd medium, and that means it's a little faster drying, and it's made by Gamblin. And this is the one that I'm currently using. It's just the same idea. You're adding this painting medium, this oil. This is actually safflower oil, and it has no solvent in it. It's just a pure oil base. And this is again what I'm using to just increase the fluidity, to get it to move. And this is also something you can add to your paint if you want to make it drip. Obviously oil and water wouldn't mix, you can't use water, but oil, either one of these would do the job to make drips or just this loose consistency with your oil. You just have to be careful how much oil you put in it. You don't want to oversaturate it with oil more than you have paint. So choosing an easel is another important thing. I personally feel strongly about painting on an easel. I feel like if you're painting flat, you're actually getting a distorted look at what you're painting. But if you're painting it as you would see it hanging on a wall, you're actually getting a more correct view of your painting, how it will be hung, and others will view it. So I have lots of easels, but when I oil paint, I always paint on this one, barring that it's not a super huge canvas, because I love that the tray, this is called a sketchbox easel, and that tray pulls out, my glass palette fits perfectly in the tray, and I have my paints just below what I'm painting. And you can even see I have my brush bucket, the one I showed you that I kept my Gamsol in, hanging from one of the little clips there from the easel. So it's just a more compact way to use space and to use my time effectively and my supplies. And then you can see just behind my easel, I have just an IKEA bar hung to my wall where I have my oil paints hanging on that. This way it's giving me a clear visual to see the colors I have. The access to them is a little bit easier than having them in a bucket or a drawer. And I think just having a little designated spot in my studio for oil painting has just made it super easy for me to pick up and paint at any time. Rubber gloves. Anybody that knows me or has taken a class knows that I would have this great giggle at anybody that came to class with rubber gloves on. However, that said, for oil painting, I always wear rubber gloves. And I think it's because oil paint doesn't come off with water. You have to use soap, or I use Dawn dish detergent to clean my hands. And if I don't have the gloves on, I feel like I'm totally conscious of that paint being on my hands. So the gloves just help me kind of block that worry about getting paint on myself or anything like that. Plus, Not only is it keeping me a little bit cleaner, but it also, if any of the colors you're using, like say cadmiums, if you're using those are a little bit toxic. So this just is another barrier to keep any strong pigments from direct contact with your skin. And finally, these white rags. So this is just a box of the rags from the hardware store. They're a bit thicker. They're way cheaper to buy a box of these than like a Viva paper towel. You could use paper towels. You can use anything you want. I just think that this kind of makes a difference. I have 200 of them right at my disposal, easy cleanup, and they're super absorbent and thick. So when I'm cleaning my brush with the Gamsol, it's a really easy cleanup. Whenever you're trying something new, there's a little bit of fear of the unknown. So I'm hoping that just going over some of my favorite supplies, how I use them, why I choose to use them, helps make your decision of transitioning into playing around with oil paints and learning a new media just a little bit easier.